A hot wind moved through the tall pines that morning, carrying the dust of the old frontier and the echoes of things a man was never meant to see. In those quiet hills, where the land rolled wide and wild, a lone Apache named Tazunk moved like a shadow between the trees. He had lived most of his life on the rugged edges of the territory, watching settlers push deeper into lands that once belonged to his people. He kept his distance, kept his silence, and kept his own code of honor. But fate has a way of pulling a man straight into the kind of moment he can never walk away from. Tazunk had been following the trail of a lost horse when he heard something strange. It wasn't the cry of an animal or the echo of gunfire. It was a muffled sound, heavy and trembling, like the earth itself was hurting. He paused, listening. Another sound followed, sharper this time, carrying fear and desperation. He stepped through a cluster of thick brush, eyes narrowed as he searched for the source. What he saw froze him in a small clearing. Lit by a weak morning sun, two settlers kneeled beside a half-dug pit in the ground. A wooden coffin sat open behind them. But inside the pit, half covered in dirt, was a woman whose face was pale and streaked with tears. Beside her was a child, no older than 4, crying with a voice so raw it cut through the trees. The woman's hands were tied, the child's too, and both looked too weak to fight. The two men spoke in low tones, their faces cold and determined as they pushed more dirt into the pit. Tazunk felt a hot surge rise in his chest. He didn't understand their language perfectly, but he knew enough to recognize cruelty when he saw it. The woman was still breathing. The child was screaming for her, yet the men were burying them as if they were. Already gone? The scene pulled him back to stories told around the campfires of his youth. Stories of his people taken by hunger, sickness, or the merciless hands of rival tribes or soldiers. Stories he had spent years trying to forget. This moment, raw and real, clawed at every part of him that still carried those memories. The child yelled again, his voice cracking. His small hands tried to claw at the rising dirt, but the men shoved him back with the head of a shovel. Tazunk's jaw tightened. He stepped forward without thinking, feet moving faster than reason, but then he stopped behind a fallen log, watching. He needed to understand what he was dealing with before acting, because this land had grown dangerous for anyone traveling alone. Outlaws, bounty hunters, and desperate families all did things they claimed were necessary. He had seen enough settlers turning on each other when times got hard, but this was something else. This felt planned, intentional. The woman tried to speak. Her lips moved, cracked and trembling, but the men ignored her. One of them, a thick-shouldered man with a scar cutting across his cheek, muttered something about tidying up loose ends. The other man nodded, shoveling more dirt with mechanical calm. Tazunk's heartbeat grew louder, pushing against his ribs. He studied the woman. She looked strong beneath the fear, like someone who had worked hard all her life. Her clothes were worn, her boots muddy, but her eyes still held a fierce spark of will. Beside her, the boy clung to her side with a kind of helpless bravery that made Tazunk's throat tighten. Something deep inside him shifted. He remembered his mother's hands, rough from work, gentle when they held him. He remembered her voice telling him that wherever there were children crying alone, the world was already losing its fight against darkness. He remembered her saying that a man must choose what kind of spirit he carried, one that walked past suffering or one that stood against it. When the men turned away from the pit to grab more dirt, Tazunk moved closer, studying every detail. Their rifles leaned against a stump. Their horses grazed a few yards away. Their faces held no remorse, no hesitation. Whatever their reason, they had already decided these two lives didn't matter, but to Tazunk, it mattered. Still, he couldn't act blindly. He needed to know what had driven these men to such a vicious act. Outlaws often betrayed their own. Settlers sometimes killed to hide land disputes. Families tore apart under the pressure of the harsh frontier. So he waited. He listened. The scarred man spoke again, saying something about the woman knowing too much. The other man agreed, saying the child would eventually talk to, so it was better to finish it now. Their voices were flat, almost bored, so if they were dealing with nothing more than a chore. Tazunk's fists curled. He had seen men do terrible things, but burying a living woman and her child was a cruelty he couldn't allow. Yet there were two of them, and only one of him. One wrong step could mean all three of them would end up in that grave. He needed the right moment, the right angle, the right opening. He watched the child struggle, watched the woman whisper comfort through her fear. He could sense her telling the boy to stay strong, telling him she wouldn't leave him. Her voice shook, but she didn't break. That kind of courage struck something deep into Sunk. A shift in the wind brought the scent of the men's sweat to him. They were tired, careless, and near the end of their grim task. He knew he had only seconds to make a choice that would change all their lives. He checked the weight of his knife at his side. He looked at the men's rifles again. He measured the distance between them and himself, and he felt a fierce clarity settle over him, like a storm cloud finding its center. Then something unexpected happened. The boy suddenly stopped crying. His small chest rose and fell. He looked up past the two men. His eyes widened, and he whispered a single word that Sunk could not hear, but felt like a warning carried on the wind. One of the men turned, frowning, sensing something was off. His eyes scanned the trees. His hand inched toward the rifle on the stump. Sunk froze, hidden but seconds away from being discovered. The woman's eyes flicked toward him and widened ever so slightly. She had seen him. She knew someone was there. Her breath caught, and for a moment the entire clearing held still. Like the land itself was waiting to see what choice he would make. Sunk knew the next heartbeat would decide everything. If the man spotted him, they would shoot him on sight. If he stayed hidden too long, the woman and child would be buried alive. The tension tightened around him like a noose. The man stepped closer to the tree line, squinting. The woman's eyes begged silently for help. The child trembled beside her. Sunk slowly wrapped his fingers around the handle of his knife, muscles bracing, ready to make the deadliest decision of his life. And in that instant, just as the man's gaze narrowed in his direction, something moved behind Sunk in the brush. A faint rustle, too soft to identify, but loud enough that the man's attention snapped to it. Sunk felt his breath catch. Whatever had moved wasn't him, and now the men were fully alert. He didn't know if he was, seconds from saving two lives or stepping into a trap he never saw coming. The clearing fell into a heavy silence, holding its breath, waiting for the danger to reveal itself. Then a twig snapped. Soon felt the sharp crack of that twig echoed through his bones. The man with the scar jerked his head toward the sound, gripping his shovel like a weapon. The other man reached for the rifle, leaning against the stump, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. The forest, moments ago calm, now seemed alive with hidden threats. The woman in the shallow grave shut her eyes tight as if bracing for whatever came next. And her child clung to her, trembling so hard his small hands shook. Sunk held still, barely breathing. He didn't know what had moved behind him, but he knew it wasn't an animal. The step was too controlled, too deliberate. Someone else was out there. Someone who might have been watching long before he arrived. The thought brought an uneasy chill crawling up his spine. He wasn't alone in protecting these two settlers, but he wasn't sure the unseen presence was on their side. The scarred man grunted, signaling the other to stay quiet. They moved slowly toward the trees, checking every shadow. Their boots pressed down on fallen leaves, snapping them one at a time, making the air grow tighter and more dangerous. Sunk's fingers closed around his knife. He lowered his posture, ready to spring if one of them came too close. Behind him, the wind shifted again, brushing through the brush at his back. The unseen figures seemed to vanish completely. Sunk hated being unsure. He had survived this rough frontier by trusting his instincts. And right now, those instincts screamed that whatever was hiding in the forest was as dangerous as the men in plain sight. The woman's voice broke the silence. Soft, trembling, but clear enough to reach Sunk. She spoke to her child, telling him to be strong, telling him she was with him, telling him he cannot give up. Her courage, even half buried in dirt, made Sunk tighten his grip. Settlers had taken everything from his people, yet this woman's voice carried something he respected: strength, love, desperation born from trying to protect something precious. The men scanned the trees for several long moments before stepping back. "Must have been an animal," one muttered, though his voice held no confidence. They returned to the pit, irritation heavy in their movements. The scarred man shoved dirt with more force, as if trying to finish quickly now. The other man picked up the boy's shoulder and pushed him deeper down. Ignoring his terrified cries, Tsunk's chest burned at the sight. But he needed to understand the truth before risking both their lives and his own. His gaze locked on the men as they worked. Their clothes were worn, but not poor. Their boots were clean, hardly the boots of drifters. Their horses were well fed. These men weren't starving. They weren't desperate townsfolk. They were prepared, organized, and clearly motivated by something more than simple cruelty. Their behavior felt practiced, like they had done this before. That thought darkened everything. Tsunk shifted his focus to the woman. Her dress was torn and dirty, but the stitching on the seams showed care and skill. It wasn't the clothing of someone living on the edge of poverty. Her boots, though scuffed, were sturdy. Her hair, matted with sweat and dirt, held a braid tied with a thin strip of blue fabric. A sign someone had loved her once. Maybe still loved her. She wasn't someone wandering alone. She belonged to a settlement or a ranch. Someone would be looking for her. And if that someone discovered she had vanished, these men might have reason to silence her forever. The boy looked healthier than most frontier children Tsunk had seen. Despite the dirt on his face, his cheeks were full, his clothing well made. Whoever this woman was, she had cared for her child. She had kept him fed, safe, and close. Families like that didn't just disappear from their towns without raising alarm. Tsunk's mind locked on one troubling question. Why were these two being buried alive where no one could find them? He wanted to ask the woman, but she was too far, and the men guarded her too closely. He needed to watch, to understand, to wait for the one opening that would give him a chance to act. The scarred man stopped shoveling and wiped his forehead with the back of his arm. "We shouldn't have brought them this far out," he muttered. "Too many eyes on the road yesterday," the other man snorted. "Nobody followed. I checked twice. But that woman saw things she shouldn't have," the scarred one replied. "And the boy will remember. He's old enough," the second man shrugged. "Then we finish it and get back before sundown." Tsunk stored those words like arrows in his mind. Whatever they were covering up, it wasn't small. It wasn't accidental. It was something big enough that they were willing to silence a woman and her child with their own hands. Something that could shake the fragile peace of the frontier. The boy suddenly looked up again, eyes wide, gazing into the forest behind Tsunk, just as before. Tsunk followed his gaze slightly, careful not to move too much. He couldn't see anyone, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The boy gasped softly, as if he recognized something or someone hidden among the trees. The scarred man caught the boy's reaction. "What are you staring at?" he snapped. The child didn't answer. He only pressed himself against his mother. The man grabbed the boy's arm harshly. The woman cried out, trying to shield him, but her movement was weak. "Enough with the noise," the scarred man growled. Tsunk felt anger heat his blood, but he forced himself to stay hidden. A single mistake would only get all three killed. The second man continued digging until the pit reached a depth he felt satisfied with. He nodded to his partner. "It's deep enough. Let's finish it before someone comes along." Ass! The moment he feared was approaching. They were going to cover the woman completely. Soon, she wouldn't be able to breathe. Soon the child wouldn't either. He edged closer, letting his foot find soft places between the leaves. Every step he took tightened the coil of danger. If one of them turned too soon, this moment would explode. But he had to get close enough to act when the time came. The scarred man lifted his shovel, ready to throw another load of dirt. His boots were inches from the woman's face. The boy screamed again and tried to stand, but the man shoved him back down. Tsunk had seen enough. His hand closed fully around his knife as he stepped closer, preparing himself for a deadly fight. But just as he shifted his weight forward, the wind carried another sound from deeper in the woods. A low whistle. Short, sharp, intentional. The men froze. The whistle came again, farther away, but unmistakably human. The scarred man tensed. "We're not alone," he muttered. The other man grabbed his rifle, breathing heavy now. "Did you bring someone?" "No," the scarred man snapped. "Did you?" "No." Tasunk felt the same confusion twist through him. Whoever was out there wasn't with these men, which meant whoever had been hiding in the trees was someone else entirely. The scarred man scanned the woods, fear creeping into his voice now. "We need to end this fast." He raised his shovel again. Tasunk stepped forward, ready to charge, but before he could act, the woman's head jerked toward the trees as if hearing something no one else could. Her eyes widened. Her breath caught. She whispered a name, too soft for the men to hear. But Tasunk heard it. Another danger was coming. Tasunk felt the clearing fall into a tension, so sharp it could slice through oak. The forest grew still again, as if the land itself braced for the storm. Building in the shadows, the scarred man lifted his shovel high. The boy closed his eyes, screamed, and the unseen presence in the trees took a single step forward, snapping another twig louder than before. Tasunk knew the moment to act was close, but he didn't know if he was walking into a rescue or straight into another deadly trap. The second twig snapped like a dry bone under a boot. Clear and sharp, the scarred man whipped around, shovel half raised, while his partner swung the rifle toward the trees. The woman flinched in the half-dug grave, pulling her child tight against her as if her arms alone could stop bullets and shovels and the cruel plans of men. Tasunk pressed closer to the trunk in front of him, feeling the rough bark against his back, knife steady in his hand, every muscle wound tight. From the shadows to his left, a figure stepped out into the clearing with slow, careful steps. He was tall, wearing a trail coat stained with dust and saddle wear, a wide hat pulled low over sharp eyes. A revolver sat high on his hip, too clean and too ready for a simple traveler. The two men stiffened when they saw him, the way men do when their boss walks into a room they have already ruined. The scarred man let the shovel drop a little. "You're late, Redden," the man with the rifle said, nerves leaking into his voice. The newcomer gave him a cold glance. "You said you could handle this, Holt. I rode out to make sure you did not lose your nerve." He looked toward the pit, toward the woman and her child, and his jaw tightened with something that was not pity. "I see you are still dragging your feet." Tasunk stored the names quickly. Holt, the scarred one, and the thinner man with the rifle. Redden, the one who carried command like another weapon. The woman's eyes widened when she saw the newcomer, and for a second the fear in them turned to anger. Her voice came out hoarse but strong. "Redden Thorne," she said. "I knew you were behind this." The boy clutched her, burying his face against her shoulder. Redden Thorne. The name fit the man. It sounded like barbed wire and iron and dust. Tasunk had heard that name before in trading posts and around lonely campfires. A cattle baron on the rise, buying up land by any means he could, keeping a tight grip on the town of Red Hollow. The story had always been the same. Men who crossed him vanished, and somehow the blame found its way to the Apache or to nameless bandits. Redden stepped closer to the grave, his boots sinking slightly into the loose dirt. "You should have kept your head down, Leora," he said. "You had a place at my ranch. Food, a roof, work. You made it harder than it had to be, Leora." Tasunk rolled the name through his mind. Strong, like the woman herself. Weak as she looked now, tied and buried to her waist. There was steel in the way. She glared at the man above her. "You had no right to take that land," she rasped. "It belongs to the families that settled the North Ridge. You forged those deeds. You thought nobody would see. But I saw the papers in your study. I heard you talking with the banker." The thinner man with the rifle shifted uneasily. "Boss, maybe this is not the best time to have her repeating all that." Redden shot him a look that shut him up. "No one will hear it," he said calmly. "That is the point of us being out here." He crouched near the pit, resting an arm over his knee as he looked down at Leora and the boy. The marshal believes the papers. The judge believes the bank. The townsfolk believe what they are told. The only one who did not believe it, he He tapped a finger against his boot. Was you. I was not the only one, she whispered. People are starting to see what you are doing. You cannot own every acre between the river and the mountain. Others will stand up. Redden smiled without warmth. Not if they think an Apache warband killed a woman and her child on the edge of my land. Folks are already nervous. Give them a little fear. They beg for a strong hand. His eyes hardened. My hand. Tasank felt the meaning hit him low and heavy. So that was the plan. Use this killing to stir up hate against his people. Blame the Apache warriors, then ride as the savior, the brave rancher defending settlers against wild raiders. The old game of the frontier lies written in dust and blood. The conflict that burned in Tasank's chest grew hotter. The army had already been restless in the nearby fort. He had heard traders talk about missing supply wagons and rumors of Apache raids that never happened. Men like Redden wanted the open land for grazing herds. Blaming his people made it easy for the army to push them from the last pieces of hunting ground. Holt shoved a little more dirt into the pit, looking away from Leora's face as he did it. His lips were pressed thin. This work was beginning to scratch at whatever conscience he still had. The boy Brannon coughed as dust rose around him, his small shoulders shuddering. Please, Brannon choked out, voice nearly gone. Don't make my ma go under the dirt. She did not do anything. Redden did not even flinch. Leora, make the boy stop. It is undignified. She pulled Brannon tight. Do not listen to him, my brave one, she murmured. You hold on. You hear me? You hold on. The words stirred Tasank's own memories. A winter raid where his family had huddled in a cave while gunshots echoed on the cliffs, his mother's voice telling him to hold on, his younger brother's hand going still in the dark. The ache of that loss wrapped tight around his ribs even now, years later. He knew what this moment would do to that child if he lived through it. He knew what it would do to him if he failed to act. But there was still the unseen presence in the trees. The whistle had not come from Redden. This meant another set of eyes watched this scene unfold. Another player in a game he did not yet understand. From the far side of the clearing, a horse snorted. The sound was soft but clear. Redden's head snapped in that direction. You said no one followed you? He told Holt sharply. Holt looked panicked. They did not. I swear it. Tracks out there, Redden said. Light ones. Someone moving careful. He stood, dusting his coat. Could be a hunter. Could be an Apache scout. Either way, if they saw us, we have a problem. The mention of Apache scout made Tasank's jaw clench. Men like Redden always spoke of Apaches as if they were either animals or tools. Never people. We can finish and ride out before anyone comes close, the rifleman said, though his voice shook. The woods are thick. Whoever it is might never find this spot again. Redden shook his head. If someone watched, they will talk. Word travels. Stories grow teeth. His gaze swept the tree line, slow and dangerous. Find them. Right now. Holt picked up his revolver. And what about them? He asked, nodding toward the pit. They are not going anywhere, Redden replied. Throw a little more dirt. Enough that they cannot climb out. We will finish the job when we return. Holt hesitated, then shoveled quickly, covering Leora's legs and Brandon's hips. Each shovelful hit Tasank like a blow. The dirt rose higher, pinning them more. Leora kept whispering to her son, her words low but full of fierce love. Brandon pressed his face against her arm, tears mixing with dust. When Holt stopped, her movement was limited, but they could still breathe and see. Redden motioned to the rifleman, whose name Tasank had not yet learned. Vern with me, Redden ordered. Holt, you stay. If anyone rides in, shoot them before they draw breath. Holt swallowed. Even if it is just some hunter from town? Especially then, Redden said. His cold eyes flicked back to the pit. No witnesses. Redden and Vern disappeared into the trees opposite Tasank, moving quickly but cautiously. Their horses were left tied at the edge of the clearing, stamping and snorting. Holt stood alone now, revolver in one hand, shovel in the other, shifting his weight nervously. Tsunk studied him. The man's shoulders sagged and his eyes kept straying to the woman and boy. This was a man caught between fear of his employer and the last piece of his own soul. Tsunk knew men like that. Some could be pushed toward mercy. Some broke and turned more cruel. Leora seemed to sense the same thing. She fixed Holt with a steady gaze. "You have family, Holt?" she asked quietly. He jerked a little at the sound of his name. "That is none of your concern." "You do," she said, reading the truth in his face. "Someone you send money to. Someone you think about when the nights are long." Her voice softened. "You bury us, and you bury whatever is left of you worth saving. You know that." His fingers tightened on the revolver. "You do not understand what Thorn can do. He owns the town, the land, the law. If I cross him, my sister will never get the medicine she needs. The doctor in Red Hollow only sees her because Thorn pays the bill." Tsunk listened, learning more about the web that stretched from this quiet clearing back to the town. Redden held power over lives in many ways, not just through money and land, but through the fear of losing what little hope people had. "That man does not give anything for free," Leora said. "He keeps you chained by your worry. Today he asks you to bury a woman and a child. Tomorrow it will be a neighbor. One day he will choose your sister when it suits him." Holt looked as if the words struck deep. His mouth opened, then closed again. He stared at the loose soil, pressing around Leora's waist, at the way Brannon's small hands gripped her sleeve. His jaw worked, but he said nothing. Brannon looked up at him with scared eyes. "Mr. Holt," he whispered, voice raw. "My pa used to say you helped him once when his wagon wheel broke on the Ridge Road. He said you were a good man." Holt flinched hard at that. Tsunk saw the memory cross his face. This boy knew him, or at least knew the story of him before Redden's shadow stretched over everything. The fight inside the man grew clearer. Tsunk stepped slowly to the side, staying hidden behind the tree trunk as he circled closer to the pit. With Redden and Vern searching the woods, this might be his only chance to move without drawing fire from 3 guns at once. If he could get close enough to cut the ropes, maybe Leora and Brannon could at least climb higher before Redden returned. He moved like he would stalk a deer, placing his feet where the ground was softest. Holt's back was partly turned to him now, the man caught between duty and guilt. The horses shifted, ears twitching. But Holt was too distracted to notice much. A breeze moved across the clearing, carrying the smell of pine and dust and fear. It also carried another scent to Tsunk: smoke, faint, distant, but real. Somewhere not far away, a small fire burned. Maybe a camp, maybe a lone rider resting. Maybe the hidden watcher whose whistle had drawn Redden out. Leora lifted her chin. "You think this ends with us," she said to Holt. "You think once we are gone, Thorn will let you rest. But he will always need more people to blame. More stories to tell the town about raiders and savages and danger. He will keep using you as long as you keep obeying." "Stop talking," Holt said, though the words lacked force. "Just stop. You can walk away," she said. "Unstrap my boy's hands. Cut mine. You can still choose the man you want to be." The revolver in Holt's hand trembled. Tsunk could see the muscles in his neck tighten. The man was teetering on a knife edge of choice. Something moved deeper in the woods. To the right of where Redden and Vern had vanished, a low murmur, a horse's snort, the clink of a bit. Whoever else was out there was not leaving. They were waiting. Tsunk was now close enough to see the rough rope around Leora's wrists. One quick slice could free her. But if Holt turned at the wrong moment, that same knife would bring bullets instead of freedom. Sweat slid slowly down Tsunk's spine, despite the cool shade. Holt took a step toward the pit, then stopped. His eyes lifted to the sky, as if searching for an answer there. "I did not sign up for this," he muttered. "I thought it would just be a scare, a ride out to put you on a coach east. That is what Redden told me at first. That is what men like him always say," Leora replied. "It starts with a lie and ends with a grave." The words hung in the air like a dark promise. From the distant trees came Redden's voice, sharp and angry, calling Holt's name. He had found something. Tracks, maybe, or a sign of whoever had whistled. The sound made Holt jump, dragging him back toward fear. He looked down at Leora and Brannon, then toward the trees, then back again. He was running out of time. So was Tasun-Ke. The Apache warrior shifted his weight slightly, preparing to spring out of cover. He felt the earth firm beneath his feet and heard the blood drums steady in his ears. Out in the woods, someone else moved toward the clearing. Holt's finger hovered near the trigger. The quiet between those scattered sounds grew heavy, stretched thin, and threatened to tear. Tasunk knew that once the first move was made, this clearing would explode into chaos. What he did in the next breath could save 2 lives, expose the rotten heart of Redenthorn's scheme, and change the fate of his people in this harsh frontier, or it could bury them all beneath the same cold earth. He drew in one last slow breath, eyes locked on the fraying rope at Leora's wrists, and stepped out of the shadows. Tasunch stepped from the shadows with the cautious silence of a hunter, each movement deliberate but powerful. Holt jerked when he sensed something at his side, but before he could fully turn, Tasunk was already between him and the pit. The man froze, fingers tightening around the revolver, fear flickering across his face. Tasunk didn't raise his knife to threaten him, but his presence alone was enough to make Holt step back. Leora gasped softly when she saw him, her eyes widening with something like stunned hope. Brannon stared at him with a mix of fear and awe, clinging to his mother as if afraid to breathe too loudly. The air in the clearing grew heavier, as if the whole forest leaned in to watch what happened next. Holt swallowed hard. "You," he whispered, voice breaking. "One of the Apache, you shouldn't be here." Tasunk didn't answer. Words would waste time he didn't have. Instead, he crouched beside the pit, his blade ready. Holt raised the revolver halfway, torn between fear of Redden, turning in fear of the warrior standing a breath away from him. Leora's voice came out low but steady. "He's here to help. Don't fight him. Not now." Tasson cut Brannon's rope first, quick and clean. The boy gasped as his arms came free, pain shooting through small wrists, rubbed raw. Tassank placed a steady hand on his shoulder to calm him, then cut Leora's bonds too. Her breath shuddered, the relief hitting her like a wave, but she did not waste time. She grabbed the dirt beside her, trying to pull herself higher with shaky arms. Holt stepped forward, as if to stop them, the revolver trembling in his hand. "If Redden comes back and sees this, I'm done. He'll take everything from me." "You already did what he wanted," Tasunk said, speaking for the first time with calm firmness. "He will still take from you." His voice held a certainty that made Holt blink. "Men like him do not leave loose strings. You are a loose string." Holt's face paled. He knew it was true. He had likely known it long before this moment. Before either man could move again, a sharp whistle cut through the trees. Not the cautious whistle of before, but a warning call, loud and urgent. It came from the same direction Redden had wandered off. Leora's breath caught. He found someone. Tasunk stood, knife ready. Holt spun toward the sound, fear crawling across his face. He took a single step toward the horses, then hesitated again. Another sound broke through the quiet hoofbeats, slow, measured, coming closer. Brannon clung to his mother. "Ma," he whispered, eyes huge. "Is that him?" Before she could answer, Redenthorn stepped out from the trees, leading his horse by the reins. But he wasn't alone. Behind him came a tall man carrying a rifle and dragging another figure by the arm. That figure was smaller, rugged, dressed in worn trail clothes. But what mattered most was his face. It was a woman. Not young, but strong, her hair tied back with a strip of cloth. She stumbled as Vern shoved her forward, but she kept her chin high. When her eyes found Leora, they widened with grief and fury. "Sage," Leora breathed. Brannon whimpered. "Aunt Sage." Tasunk felt the pieces shift. The hidden watcher had not been an enemy. She had been family. Redden's cold smile spread slowly across his face. "Looks like our audience just grew larger." Holt cursed under his breath, panic clawing at him. He raised the revolver halfway, but didn't know where to aim. Redden's gaze flicked to him, then to Tasunk, and finally to the freed ropes in the pit. So Redden said, voice low like distant thunder, We have ourselves an Apache hero today." He stepped forward, hand hovering above his revolver in the kind of practiced motion that meant he was seconds away from drawing it. Vern raised his rifle and aimed directly at Tasank's chest. Leora tensed, pulling Brannon behind her. Tasank stayed still, reading every angle, every breath, every footfall. His knife felt light and ready in his hand. Redden studied him with interest. "You should have stayed out of this, warrior. This is a matter among settlers. Your lies spread beyond settlers," Tasank said calmly. "Your hate reaches my people. Your greed reaches their land," Redden chuckled. "Then we'll settle both matters here. 2 birds, 1 bullet for each." Sage struggled against Vern's grip. "Let them go, Redden. Let the child go. You can settle whatever feud you want with me." "Feud," Redden scoffed. "You think this is personal? This is business, land, power, control, and you, Sage. You're another problem who listens too much and wanders too far." Holt lowered his weapon a little, looking sick. "Redden, there are too many witnesses now." "We can't do this, witnesses," Redden asked softly. "You think any of them live long enough to testify?" Holt's breath hitched. Tasank saw the truth settle in the man like a stone thrown into deep water. Redden Thorn didn't just want the woman and boy gone. He wanted every single person in the clearing dead, Holt included. Redden nodded to Vern. "Start with the Apache." Tasank moved first. He lunged sideways just as Vern pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the clearing, sparking off the stone behind him. Tasank rolled behind a tree, knife held tight, hearing Leora scream for Brannon to keep his head down. Holt cursed loudly, torn between sides. Redden fired next, shooting at Tasank's last position. Bark exploded from the tree trunk. Vern cocked his rifle again, stepping forward with the cold focus of a hunter determined to finish the job. Tasank stayed low, letting instinct guide him. He moved fast, crossing from one shadow to another. He could feel their eyes trying to track him, feel the pressure of the moment pushing him to act quicker, sharper. He spotted Holt struggling, torn between fear and the last thin strand of conscience. Vern shoved Sage to the ground and stepped closer for a clearer shot. Redden kept his revolver trained on the pit, ready to fire at any movement from Leora or Brannon. Tasank threw a stone across the clearing. It hit the branches behind Redden, drawing the cattle baron's eyes away for half a second. Half a second was all Tasank needed. He moved like wind across the ground, coming up behind Vern in near silence. The man only sensed him when it was too late. Tasank slammed his shoulder into him, knocking the rifle from Vern's grip and sending him crashing onto his back. The weapon flew far across the dirt. Redden spun, aiming his revolver right at Tasank's side. Holt shouted no, but Redden pulled the trigger. Tasank ducked, feeling the heat of the bullet pass inches above his arm. Vern scrambled up and swung a fist, but Tasank caught his wrist midair and twisted hard. Vern let out a cry and dropped to his knees. Before Tasank could disarm him further, Redden fired again, forcing him to leap back. Holt stood frozen, breathing hard, revolver still raised but pointed nowhere. Redden snapped, "Shoot him!" "Holt, shoot him!" Holt didn't move. Redden glared with fury. "I said shoot him!" Holt trembled. He aimed his revolver at Tasank. Leora looked up at him with wide eyes. Sage stared at him with disbelief. Brannon whispered, "Please don't." Holt's hands shook harder. Redden barked, "Do it." Holt made a sound somewhere between fear and pain as he shut his eyes and tightened his finger on the trigger. Tasank braced himself, ready to move even though he knew he couldn't dodge a bullet at such close range. But Holt's gun pointed upward at the last second. The shot blasted into the sky. Redden's face hardened with cold fury. "You traitor." "I'm done," Holt whispered. "I'm done doing this. You're done when I say you're done." Redden raised his revolver at Holt. Tasank moved instantly, sprinting across the clearing even as Vern lunged for him. Holt flinched back, arms raised. Redden steadied his aim, his finger tightening, Sage from the ground. Threw a handful of dirt into Vern's eyes, making him stumble blindly. Leora pulled Brannon closer, shielding him with her body. The horses whinnied in panic. Sensing the violence thick in the air, Redden steadied his. Shot to Sunk was still 2 steps away. The wind held its breath. Brannon screamed. Sage grabbed Holt's wrist. Vern blinked dirt from his eyes. Redden fired. The bullet hit something. Someone cried out. And as the shot echoed through the trees, and blood fell onto the dirt, the clearing erupted into chaos. The story had just hit its breaking point, but the fate of every soul there still hung by a thread, could snap at any second. The gunshot tore through the clearing like a crack of lightning. For an instant, everything froze, the world holding its breath before reality caught up. Sage fell to her knees, clutching her arm where the bullet grazed her shoulder. Holt stared in shock at the path the shot had taken, his revolver still raised but trembling. Redden had tried to shoot him, but Sage's last-second pull on Holt's wrist shifted the aim just enough to spare his life. T'Sonk did not wait for the next move. He lunged forward with the force of every instinct he had, slamming into Redden before the man could fire again. The 2 men hit the ground hard, dust rising around them. Redden struggled like a wild thing, strong and desperate. He threw an elbow at T'Sonk's temple, but the Apache warrior tightened his grip and knocked the revolver from his hand. It bounced across the ground and landed near Holt's boot. Vern, finally clearing the dirt from his eyes, staggered up and tried to reach the fallen gun. But Sage kicked it further out of reach with a fierce swing of her leg. Leora, still half buried, held her son tight while her eyes stayed locked on T'Sonk. Hope, mixing with fear as she watched the final fight unfold, Redden managed to break free for a split second and reached for a knife hidden in his boot. He drew it fast, aiming it toward T'Sonk's side. Holt reacted on instinct. He stepped between them, knocking Redden's arm away with a burst of courage he didn't know he had left. The knife scraped across Holt's sleeve instead of finding flesh, leaving only a thin tear in the fabric. Redden glared at him with betrayal. "You were supposed to obey," he hissed. "No more," Holt breathed, voice weak but sure. "I ain't your tool anymore." T'Sonk used Redden's moment of distraction to knock the knife from his grip and pin him down with a calculated strength. Redden finally realized he had lost. He lay beneath T'Sonk, chest heaving, pride shattered. His eyes darted toward the trees as if someone might still save him, but no help was coming. His lies, his plans, his power, all of it, had crumbled in the clearing he thought he controlled. Vern, seeing Redden, pinned and Holt no longer on their side, dropped his attempt to fight. He raised both hands, breathing hard. "I surrender," he gasped. "I don't want trouble anymore. I never wanted any of this." Sage managed to stand despite the pain in her arm. "Then you should have walked away earlier," she said, voice sharp like broken flint. T'Sonk pressed his knee into Redden's shoulder to keep him still. "Your lies end now," he said quietly. "The land you stole, the families you threatened, the stories you twisted, it ends today." Redden's breath came fast, but he didn't argue. The weight of defeat sat on him heavier than any grip. Holt stepped back, lowering his revolver slowly until it hung limp at his side. His shoulders sagged, and he looked at Leora and Brannon with a face full of regret. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Leora looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Then make things right," she said softly. "Help us get out of here. Help us tell the truth." Holt nodded, swallowing hard. "I'll do it. Whatever it takes." With the danger finally subdued, T'Sonk stood and turned toward Leora and her son. He reached down and offered his hand. Leora took it with trembling fingers. T'Sonk pulled her up from the grave slowly, careful not to hurt her. Brannon clung to her, crying quietly into her shoulder. When they were free from the loose soil, Leora held T'Sonk's hand for a moment longer. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't think anyone was coming. You were strong," T'Sonk replied. "You've kept hope alive for your child." "That strength called someone." "It called me." Brannon sniffed and looked up at him. "You saved us," he said in a small but sincere voice. Sage walked to them and wrapped her good arm around both mother and child, letting Brannon bury himself into her side next. Tears of relief streamed down her face. For a moment, they stood like that, family pulled back from the edge of a nightmare. Tasunk scanned the clearing to make sure the threat was truly gone. Vern stood still with hands raised. Redden lay defeated, staring at the sky as if unsure how everything had slipped away. Holt kept a wary eye on both men, while Sage's horse snorted nervously at the edge of the clearing. "We should go," Sage said. "There'll be more trouble if Thorn's men come looking." Holt shook his head. "They won't come. He keeps his dirty work secret. Nobody else knows he rode out here. That makes it safer," Leora said. "But we still need to get to the town. The sheriff has to hear everything." "The sheriff is in Redden's pocket," Holt replied ruefully. "But the marshal who covers the whole valley comes through tomorrow morning. He doesn't answer to Redden. If we get to the station before sunrise, we can tell him." Tasunk nodded. "Then we ride now." With time against them, they moved quickly. Sage tore strips of cloth from her sleeve to wrap her arm, and Tasunk helped her tighten it. Leora steadied herself, though the dirt and the fear had drained her body. Brannon clung to her hand, but walked bravely. Holt tied Redden's hands and feet, ignoring the man's furious glare. "You think they'll believe you over me?" Redden spat. "A traitor? A wounded woman? A boy? A stranger? And an Apache? They'll laugh you out of the station." Holt looked down at him with a weary but firm expression. "They'll believe the truth when it's loud enough." Redden's jaw tightened in resentment. Vern lifted his hands higher. "I'll testify too," he said shakily. "I don't want his blood on me anymore." Leora nodded. "Then you walk with us, and you speak every word honestly." Vern swallowed. "I will." The group mounted the horses quickly. Sage took Brannon up with her. Leora rode behind Holt since she was too weak for her own saddle. Tasunk tied Redden to his own horse, making sure he couldn't escape, then took the lead, riding through the trees. The scent of pine felt sharper now, cleaner, as if the land itself approved of the truth being carried through it. The ride through the forest was long and tense, but no ambush came. As they cleared the last row of trees and saw the dim lanterns of Red Hollow glowing ahead, Leora let out a shaky breath. The frontier town looked small and quiet, but that quiet held promise now. Truth, justice, a fresh start, they all waited in that direction. As dawn began to soften the sky, the group reached the old rail station, where the marshals stopped once a week. Holt tied the horses to the post and helped Leora down. Brannon hopped into his mother's arms and buried his face in her shoulder again. Sage stood beside them like a shield. Tasunk kept Redden secured. The cattle baron tried to straighten his back, but there was no dignity left in him. The lies he spun for years were finally unraveling. When the marshal arrived just after sunrise, he found an unexpected scene waiting for him. A frightened boy, a scarred woman, a wounded aunt, a trembling ranch hand, an Apache warrior standing tall and silent, and a land baron bound tightly and glaring at all of them. The marshal listened carefully as each voice pieced the truth together. Leora told her story with calm strength. Sage added what she heard and saw. Holt admitted everything. Vern confessed his part. Tasunk explained how he stumbled into the clearing and could not turn away. The marshal took notes silently, his expression growing darker with each detail. Then he looked at Redden Thorn. "You're finished," he said simply. The arrest was swift, the charges heavy. By midday, word spread across Red Hollow. People were shocked, some relieved, some angry. They had been fooled. But the truth had finally broken through the fear. The land Redden tried to steal was returned. His influence shattered. The town began to breathe again. For Leora and Brannon, hope returned in gentle pieces. Sage moved them into a small cabin near the ridge until they could rebuild their home. People in town offered help, food, blankets, anything to ease their burden. The boy slept closer to his mother for many nights, but each morning he woke with more light in his eyes. As for Holt, he stayed on to testify, then found work as a stable hand far from Redden's reach. His sister finally received the medicine she needed through honest means. He carried guilt, but also the chance to become a better man. Vern left town after the trial, heading east to start over. He promised Leora he would never let fear make him blind again. And Tassoon stayed only long enough to be sure the family was safe. When the land healed and Redden's shadow was gone, he returned to the forest he knew so well. But before he left, Brannon ran up to him with a small wooden carving in hand. "A little horse, shaped by a child's hands? It's for you, Brannon," said shyly. Tasunk accepted it with a warm nod. "I will keep it." "You saved us," Brannon whispered. Tasunk placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "You and your mother saved yourselves. I only answered the call." Leora stepped forward, her eyes soft with gratitude. "We owe you everything." "You owe me nothing," Tasunk said. "But if you ever need help again, look to the trees. The land remembers." As he turned and disappeared into the forest, Leora held Brannon close. Watching the quiet strength of the man who changed their fate, the frontier remained rough and wild, but now they knew that courage lived even in the darkest corners, and hope could rise from the deepest places. Their home would be rebuilt, their lives restored, and the truth once buried had risen with them, shining brighter than the morning sun over the old American frontier.